this verse with you. It starts in verse 13, Romans chapter 6. And it says this. It says, do not let any part of your body become an instrument of evil to serve sin. Then he says, instead, give yourselves completely to God, for you were dead, but now you have new life. Can somebody say new life? Do we have this verse on the screen? Somebody say new life. New life. And he goes on and he says, so use your whole body as an instrument to do what is right for the glory of God. It says, sin is no longer your master, for you no longer live under the requirements of the law. Instead, you live under the freedom. Somebody say freedom. You live under the freedom of God's grace. You skip down a couple verses and he says, don't you realize that you become a slave of whatever you choose to obey? It says you can be a slave to sin, which leads to death, or you can choose to obey God, which leads to righteous living. And so like I said, we're in a series called New Life Everywhere, and I have good news for you actually, that we're talking about this new life that we have in Jesus. When we come to Jesus, we get new life. It's not just hope for heaven. It's not just a ticket to heaven, but he gives us new life. And a part of that new life is freedom. Now, you and I have been given freedom. He has set us free. He has released our bondage, and he has given us freedom. He has set us free. That's good news today, isn't it? Jesus has set you and I free. We have been completely and totally set free from everything that was bringing us down, from everything that was holding us down, from everything that was against us, harming us, hurting us, from the powers of evil and sin. He has set us free. But here's the thing. We can talk about freedom. We can talk about we've been set free. You have freedom. But here's the thing. This is my message title for you today. Freedom isn't what you think it is. We've got freedom. Jesus has set us free. But freedom isn't what you think it is. Can somebody say freedom isn't what you think it is? Does anybody know a picky eater by chance? Anybody know a picky eater? Yes, you all know some picky eaters. I've known a few picky eaters, and you know, like, it's fine. I don't judge anybody. I try not to judge people. But like, you know, when we're at Little Big Burger, and if you've been ever to Little Big Burger and you've tried their fry sauce, you know how much your heart hurts when somebody's eating Little Big Burger fries without dipping it into the fry sauce. You know what I mean? It's like, oh my gosh. Like, my wife and I, we had this friend, super picky eater, love her, God bless her. We don't judge her, but we went out to eat, and my heart hurt a little bit, right? Because it was like, oh my gosh, like, you're missing out. You know what I mean? Which reminds me, actually, like, we do have to pray for a fellow staff member because, like, his name, and he already knows I'm talking about him, Stephen Beatty. I don't know if you know, but when Stephen Beatty goes to Chick-fil-A, he does not use Chick-fil-A sauce. And I feel like that's kind of a sin, almost. Yeah, so we're praying for him. You know what I mean? Like, I'm still like in daily intercession for him. And he's on staff too, so like there's a higher standard that you gotta live up to when you're on staff. So we're praying. We're still in some deep prayer. But another picky eater I know is my 3-year-old, Scarlett Jean. She, I'll be honest, she's gotten better and we're really proud. But if it was up to her, her diet would consist of cheese, bread, and butter. Somebody say amen. Like, that's like me too, right? You know what I mean? Like, somebody's like, wait, why is that weird? But we know, right? Like, that's not necessarily the healthiest diet. You know what I mean? And so we, as her parents, we have to kind of like parent her, obviously. You know what I mean? Like, well, yeah, no, like, you can't just eat cheese, bread, and butter. Like, we love you so much, but you can't just do that because you won't be healthy, all of these reasons. But to her, like, she gets kind of upset sometimes. You know what I mean? Because she's just like, why? Why can't I be free to have my cheese, bread, and butter all day, every day? That's what I want. And so we got to parent her and kind of be like, no, like, you need your vegetables. Like, she's really into broccoli now, which is a big, like, parental win. Can somebody give a, clap? I need some affirmation as a dad. Like, she's into broccoli now. Thank you, I receive it. It's all my wife, actually. I took credit for no reason. Like, I'll hear about that one later. She's like, oh, so you got her into broccoli? And so we've had to parent her, right? Because if it was up to her, if she had her freedom, she'd be all about cheese, bread, and butter. But freedom is such an interesting thing, isn't it? Like, when we begin this conversation and we have new life, but what does it mean to have freedom? What is freedom? How do you define freedom? And then the interesting thing is our world defines it in a very specific way. They have a very specific, there's one thing that comes to mind. You see it in music, you see it in movies, in art. There's a very specific way that freedom is defined in our world. For example, there's this song here, and this song says this. It says, now feel free. Do whatever you want, whenever you want, with whoever you want. Feel free. Who cares what they say? Yes, that's a Pitbull quote for you on a Sunday morning. That's right, for you youngins know who Pitbull is. But that's the definition of freedom in our world, isn't it? It's do what you want. You're free. You can do what you want whenever you want. That's what freedom means. That's what people want when they want to be free, right? Oh, I just need to do my own thing. I just want to be free to do my own thing. What does that mean? Do my own thing. I want to be free to do whatever I want. Right? Like, I don't want those restrictions. I don't want any of those things. I want to be free. And see, the interesting thing is Paul, in our verse that we read today, if you read a little before this verse, he's talking about grace. And the grace that you and I have when we come to God, that we live in the freedom of God's grace. And I don't know if you ever noticed, but when you read Paul and he's writing, he'll sometimes, especially in Romans, he'll say what he knows the other person is thinking and then respond to them. Have you ever noticed that? And he's talking in this verse, he's talking about freedom and God's grace. And then he's like, oh yeah, and some will say, well, because there's freedom, because there's grace, doesn't that mean I can do whatever I want, right? Like, there's freedom, there's grace, right? People say that all the time, oh, well, I can do this. There's grace, right? There's grace. God has grace. God will forgive me. There's grace for this, right? Don't we sometimes think like that? But we don't realize that our definition of freedom has just become the world's definition of freedom. And so Paul, he writes this letter and this verses, and he starts to say, no. And this is my first thought for you today. What he's trying to say is freedom is better and different in Jesus. He wants you to know right off the bat, the first thing that you want to know when you're beginning to talk about this new life, this freedom, this grace that you and I have been given, the first thing he wants you to know is you got to know this first, is freedom is different and better in Jesus. See, he starts this off and he starts off this verse and he says something so genius. Like, if you're at all a nerd and you know any of the comments in the conversation around freedom in more recent philosophy and history, you will know that Paul, in this just statement that's so simple but has huge implications for our lives, is so ahead of his time. He is a genius. And he says this, he says, it's so simple, but he says, don't you realize that you become the slave of whatever you choose to obey? And then you'll have people thinking, well, what if I obey nothing? What if I am free? What if I'm just doing whatever I want? What if there's nothing I'm obeying? Well, another great thinker, Augustine would say this. He would say, without the Spirit, this is so good. He says, without the Spirit, man's will is not free, since it has been laid under by shackling and conquering desires. What are they trying to say? Wait, what does this mean? Well, Paul says, don't you know that you become a slave to whatever you choose to obey? And in our world, where our desires, where our wants, where our desires and our feelings are ultimate, what they're trying to say is, well, what if doing whatever you want, following your desires, doing whatever it is you want to do whenever you want to do, what if that's not freedom? What if that's just another form of bondage? Another thinker puts it this way. He says, I want to take this cup. And next slide. He says, I want to take this cup and throw it right now. I have every right to. I should. We see it with children, but that's not happiness. That feeling of having to obey every impulse and gratify every desire seems to me to be a strange kind of slavery. Nobody talks about it as such, though. How interesting is that? When our world defines freedom as being able to do what you want whenever you want. That's what freedom is. That's when I know I'm free. When I can do what I want. When I can make my own decisions. When I have full autonomy. That's when I am free. But what I want to pose to you today is when you examine a little deeper, that's not actually freedom. I can remember times when I have walked alongside men who were struggling with porn. And they were completely free, right? They were totally and completely free to follow their desires, to do what they want. But they would tell you themselves that it was not leading them to freedom. They would tell you themselves that what seemed like freedom was not actually leading them to be free. As a matter of fact, it was quite the opposite. In the words of Augustine, they would say that their desires were shackling them, were conquering them. And so you have to ask, okay, then what is freedom? What does it mean to be free? What is real freedom? You got to ask, who is more free? The man who is free to follow every desire and do what he wants but objectifies women, or the man who does not follow every desire, does not always do what he wants, but has a marriage that lasts? Who is more free? What's freedom? And this is important for us to understand because it is central to our life with God. What is this freedom that we are called to live in? And so Paul, in our verse, he goes on. He says this. He says, don't you realize that you become the slave of whatever you choose to obey? You can be a slave to sin, which leads to death, or you can choose to obey God, which leads to righteous living. And what is he saying? He is saying, and this is my second thought for you, he says, your freedom is found in obeying God. Now, if you're here, and if we're going to be honest for a second, he says your freedom is found in obeying God, but if you're going to be honest for a second, you're like, whoa, like, how does that make sense? Like, that makes absolutely no sense. Like, freedom and obeying God, those are opposites, aren't they? Like how can my freedom, how can I find freedom in obeying God? Like, doesn't God have those restrictions and those rules? And when you read the Bible, do this, don't do that, blah, 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 all these things. How is that freedom? Don't they seem like opposites? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Well, does anybody here watch football? Anybody? Okay, some people. Even if you don't watch football, does anybody know who Tom Brady is? After this Super Bowl, y'all know who Tom Brady is? Yeah, well, in my opinion, greatest football player to ever live. He is incredible, won this last Super Bowl, and he has so many records. He is he's the oldest person. He's like the only person to win a Super Bowl in 3 different decades. Like, hello, he's incredible. He is like literally the GOAT. He is the greatest of all time. I'm going to put that on record right here on stage at Anthem Church. Tom Brady is the GOAT. If you don't agree, you can find another church. I'm just kidding. It's just like, whoa. What? Dude, calm down. It's not that serious, okay? I'm just kidding. I'm not really. Just kidding. He is the best. And after this last Super Bowl, I don't know if you heard any of the buzz, but his daily regimen kind of blew up. You know what I mean? Like everybody started talking about, because he was breaking so many records and was doing all of these amazing things and won the Super Bowl and nobody thought he would, and first time on this team, and he's super old. And so his regimen kind of made the news. And everybody was talking about it, and I'd be down, except his dessert, I'm gonna treat myself today. His dessert is avocado ice cream, and it's man, I'll stick with chocolate. I'm good with chocolate, you know what I mean? But he's got a crazy intense daily schedule and things that he sticks to. And here's the thing though. What's the point of all of this? Why does he do this and not do all these other things? What is the point? Well, see, the thing is that to Tom Brady, all of these things, his regimen, are not things that are restricting him. There are not rules that he's living by to restrict himself, but these are actually things that are freeing him to be the absolute best that he could be. See, I need you to get that to Tom Brady, these things, he doesn't eat chocolate ice cream, not because he doesn't want to. He loves chocolate ice cream. He was talking about in an interview how he loves pizza. He doesn't eat pizza. Why? Not because he's trying to restrict himself, but he's freeing himself from everything that could keep him from becoming the absolute best that he could be. And I want you to think about anybody who is great in their arena. Absolutely anybody on earth who is great at what they do. And I think about it. Is do whatever I want whenever I want the motto of their life? Probably not. Think of the greatest cellist or pianist. Think of the greatest gymnast. The motto of their life is never do what I want whenever I want. See, they have found that these things that so many people view as restrictions are actually setting them free to be the absolute best that they can be, setting them free from anything that's keeping them from being the best. And okay, being a good football player is awesome. Being a great gymnast is great. But what about being the person who God has made you to be? What about being the person and living in the life, in the abundant and full life that God has for you? I need you to know something tonight, this morning. It's not tonight. Is that God's intention for you is to live in everything that he has for you. To live in this new, full, healthy, abundant life that he has for you. And that's why it's not do whatever you want whenever you want. Not because he wants to restrict you. See, God is not interested in restricting you. God is interested in freeing you. He wants to set you free. But don't we get it backwards? We get it backwards. We come to God, we come to Jesus, and we're like, thank you, Jesus, for this new life. Thank you for salvation. Thank you for my ticket to heaven. I'm good, I'm set. I'm good. Oh, but read the Bible. Do what Jesus says. Do what, I'm good. I'm all right. I'm good. And then we get so confused when nothing changes. we get so confused when our life stays the same or gets worse. But Jesus, I went to church. But Jesus, I raised my hand. But Jesus, I sang the song. And he's like, no, I want to set you free, and you got to know that. You got to know what I want for you. You got to know what I have for you. But you also got to know that your freedom is found in living the way of Jesus. Your freedom is found in not being a fan of Jesus, but in being a follower of Jesus. If you want to experience freedom in your life, it is found by following Jesus day in and day out. If you want to experience him and everything that he has for you. We talk about this abundant life all the time. Do we just think it's a good idea? I don't know about you, but sometimes I'm at church and we're talking about abundant life, and I'm like, man, this part of my life still isn't abundant yet. If I'm being honest with myself, right? This part of me still isn't abundant yet. And what do I come to realize? That those are the very points in me, in my life, that I have yet to surrender to Jesus. Is there any part of our lives that just aren't healthy? Any part of our lives that we don't feel comfortable bringing up at church? I want you to know that he wants to set you free. I want you to know that there is freedom, that there is more for you, there is more for me. I want you to know that he does have an abundant, filled life, that he has a healthy and whole life for you. And it comes when we surrender. When we surrender. And that's a process. That is a process. And that takes me to my third and final thought for you today. Is this freedom doesn't make sense until you know what God is like. This freedom does not make sense until you know what God is like. See, here's the truth. If we're honest with ourselves for just a moment, if we just take a second, if we're honest with ourselves, there's a reason why doing what we want feels a lot more like freedom. And what is that reason? And the truth is, it's very noble. It's not bad. It's noble. And the truth is that we, on the inside of us, all of us feel that on the inside of us, out of anybody on earth, that we will look out for ourselves, right? Like that we know that we're not going to intentionally lead ourselves the wrong way, right? That we know that we're going to try and do our best to make good decisions. And that's why it feels, and the thing is, if you think the opposite about God, if you think that God is just out there to restrict you, that God just wants to take from you, that God isn't actually for you, that he doesn't actually know you or care about you, then doing what you want will feel a lot more like freedom than obeying God. But you've got to know something this morning. You've got to know that obeying God isn't for God. He's not up there telling, obey me because I need you to obey me. It's not for God, it's for us. We're talking about the God who came to earth, who gave up everything to come as a human, and who gave himself up for you and for me. See, the truth is, freedom is not always free. There's a price. But somebody else picked up the bill. And his name is Jesus. And he didn't do it for himself. He's not in this just for himself. Everything he talked about in the scriptures, everything that he's calling us to live into, it's not for him. It's for us. It's because he loves us. For God so loved the world that he gave his only son. He's not in it for himself. He loves you. He knows you. And only when you get that he gave himself for you, can you give yourself to him. Only when you get that this is the God who gave himself for you, can you give yourself to him. See, because obeying God sounds like kind of harsh language. And it sounds completely opposite from freedom. Oh, your freedom, this is your freedom. How do you find freedom? In obeying God. That's how you find freedom. What? That doesn't make sense until you know who he is. Until you've had some time to know him. Until you've had time to sit with the cross and his blood pouring out, not for himself, but for you, to set you free so that you may come to him, so that you may know him, so that you may be set free from everything that is holding you down, from everything that is against you, from all evil and sin and brokenness. He died and he bled on the cross for you. And everything that he has for you is because he loves you. And only when you come to Jesus like that will any of it make sense. So what does this mean for you and for me? What does this mean? One, what's your picture of God? It always has to start there. And it doesn't matter if you've been a follower of Jesus for 5 minutes or 50 years. Our picture of God has to constantly shift as you know somebody more, doesn't it? As you continue to know them more for who they are. Today, what's your picture of God? How do you view his posture towards you? When you close your eyes, when you pray, what's his posture towards you? What's your picture of him? And two, we can have the band start to come up as I'll close. And two, what area of our lives do we have to surrender? And continually surrender. And not only surrender, but Jesus, teach me how to walk a new way. Jesus, in what areas of my life am I not obeying? In what areas of my life am I not following your word and what you say? And here's the thing, when you step into those areas, you will find freedom. You will find a freedom for your life.